There wasn't anything that she didn't ask of him that he didn't give to her.
Wake up, honey. You partied too hard last night again. Morning. Here, I got some coffee for you. Sit and drink.
Though they both grew up in Krotz Springs, these days, the couple lives an hour away, outside Baton Rouge.
Oh, God, it hurts.
John.
Hey, Wendy, good to see you.
What's up, man? What's up?
Hey.
Good to see you.
How y'all doing?
Doing good. We'll be better in a bit. Shots, pronto. Way ahead of you, honey. Yeah, girl. Yeah. Awesome. So here you go, Wendy Snyder. This is for you. Woo! Oh, yeah. We'll take another.
Take your time, girl.
Oh, no. Don't tell me take it easy. We're partying tonight.
I told her to put the brakes on. She has a hard time knowing how to say when.
Davina was an easygoing person, but she had a temper that was accelerated by alcohol. She could walk away from most things, but if you added a little alcohol to it, she could have a temper. And she did have a temper.
There. Guys, I would like to play pool on this pool table, and I would like for you guys, you've been playing all night.
Davina, darling, come on. We're here with Sam and Wendy, okay?
I know, but I think Sam and Wendy can be boring sometimes, and I would rather just play
with them, okay?
pool.
We'll go get him and bring him.
I know, but I would like...
What's he doing here?
Jason! Woo! Hey!
Hey, John. Jason was a great guy, a guy who cared about Davina, but Davina was in love with John Schneider. Jason Thibodeau was in love with Davina Chapman.
John was definitely jealous of Jason and Davina's relationship. He realized how close they were.
Davina confided a lot in Jason, and Davina had a very special bond with Jason. I think at that point where John had a problem with Jason was the fact that their relationship was not going where he thought it was or should have been, even though the reasons it weren't were his own fault.
Jason? You know him? He comes sniffing around every time we're here. And I don't know, I think he was being a little friskier this time.
Looking good, you.
Stop.
Baby girl, you got a joint for daddy or what? Figure out a way to return the favor.
Hey, back off!
Get your freaking hand off. What the hell's your problem?
Hey, stop it, stop it. He's playing, he's playing.
But how about I stick around and help look for a bit?
Man, I appreciate that, Roy. I'm worried she's hurt somewhere. Sam and I are gonna drive down the road a bit. Wendy, if you don't mind staying in case she comes back here.
Sure.
I appreciate it. Come on.
Davina?
Not 4 hours ago, 32-year-old Davina Chapman vanished from a roadside bar near Louisiana's Atchafalaya Swamp.
When you head up to Kelly's Tavern, where Davina was last seen, there's a levee on one side, and there's really not much other than woods on the other. It's murky, it's swampy, and it's not...
Wait.
Hello?
So then John called me, and John said, Dolores, we can't find Davina. Have you heard from her? Has she called you?
What are you talking about? Hold on a minute, let me check my phone. Nope, nothing. Oh, but you know how she is.
He said, I've checked everywhere, I can't find her.
Oh, she'll turn up. But let me know when she does, all right? Oh, that girl was hitchhiking.
He said, "You're not going to take this serious, are you?" I said, "She's bound to go back to work Monday morning because she's been on vacation. So if she don't show up at work Monday morning, John, I will get serious about this."
So we said, well, we're gonna wait and see what happens Monday morning, because she always went to work. If she didn't go to work for some reason, she would always call her boss.
Daybreak. 6 hours since Davina's mysterious disappearance. And John gathers up anyone he can think of to help look for her.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Sam, anything?
John Snyder, you should have seen him, man. He was panicking. He was frantically looking for Davina. I don't know exactly how many people, but I'm sure 50 to 75 people in that bar looking for his Davina.
Krotz Springs is a really small town in St. Landry Parish here in Louisiana. It is, I'd say, working class, hardworking people. It's a very small town, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody.
It hasn't yet been 24 hours, but John's aunt, the chief of police, sends help in the form of St. Landry detective Ivory Chevis.
Well, Doug, I hear you got a lot of excitement here.
Morning, Detective. Yeah, it's a real head scratcher. Water?
No, I'll pass. So can you give me any idea as to who all was here last night?
It was packed. We were hopping. We had the tourists in town for the boat races. And then we had a lot of those pipeline guys.
In Louisiana, when you have all those pipelines, it brings in folks from all over the country. Those people, often they get involved in liquor and drugs and things happen, and it's nightmarish when a crime takes place near those places. So was there an atmosphere that this something mysterious could have happened to her? Yes.
Did you see Davina talking to any of them?
Not really. But I think a lot of them wanted to talk to her. She was having a good old time. But I can't really say. I was busy myself.
What about this fella she was talking to? A fella by the name of, Jason Thibodeau.
Oh, yeah. Jason was here.
The thing is, according to their friends, Davina and Jason have a history.
There you go, babe.
An on-again, off-again thing.
Well, Jason Thibodeau was a friend of hers, and the two of them had had a relationship.
So, we ever gonna leave your apartment today?
Why, you got somewhere better to be.
I can't think of one.
You know what, Doug?
Yeah.
I think I will take you up on that water now.
Salty peanuts?
Peanut salty, buddy.
Sort of coordinating this search effort for Davina.
I know that it was extremely hot that day, or that weekend. Of course, it was the middle of July in Louisiana. And everyone was looking for her, you know, going through trees, brush so thick where you ultimately can't see.
They know if she's hurt and alone out here in the Atchafalaya, she's in danger.
Well, this is South Louisiana. We have alligators, we have snakes, things that can hurt you in the swamps.
There's nothing there but swamp. That's a hunting club. It's where people hunt.
It's perfect to breed criminal activity. So not only do the animals go there for refuge, sometimes bad guys go there to do bad things.
Where are you, darling?
When I got to Kelly's Tavern, which was where the meeting place was, John actually approached me and said, "You've known her the longest. What do you think happened to her? She got in a vehicle with someone." And my response to him was, I know two things didn't happen. One, she did not get in a vehicle with a stranger at her wheel. And two, that something bad had happened to her. And that was our conversation.
Detective Chevis doesn't want to interrupt the search, but he needs to talk to John to see what else he remembers.
John Snyder.
Sir,
Yeah, Detective Ivory Chevis, St. Landry Parish.
Well, it took you long enough. When are we gonna get the sheriff's guys out here to help?
Well, I'm sure they'll be out here soon, but for right now, can we go inside so
Sure.
I get your statement?
Of course. Thank you. I wanted to leave, but she wouldn't. And she was wild. So when I got fed up, I left her in the parking lot. You know, this guy, Jason, he just brings this, I'm telling you, he has something to do with it.
So can you think of anyone else you might have been talking to last night, or can you tell me anything else that seems unusual?
There was a couple other guys, but they weren't with us.
Hey, but girl, you gotta chill for Daddy. I'll figure out a way to return the favor.
Hey, back off!
What the hell's your problem?
Hey, stop it, stop it. He's playing. Why can't we just have fun, guys, huh?
Hey, I'll have some fun with you.
Would you mind your own business?
You need to get some manners, boy.
Or what?
Shortly before her disappearance, Davina Chapman and her boyfriend John Snyder had a run-in with some pipeline workers at the bar.
Hey, I'll have some fun with you.
Would you mind your own business?
You need to get some manners, boy.
Or what? There was one guy who kept staring at us. At Davina, specifically.
So these family's house.
So are we good? Okay, so I just start?
It's a beautiful woman, gone missing. For some reason, those stories always hit a nerve with people in the public.
My girlfriend, Davina Chapman, disappeared Saturday night. And I miss her very... The whole town's chipping in. Everybody's searching. Everybody's holding out hope. This isn't something that happens in this little... It's not here. If anybody knows anything about her whereabouts, please contact the police department. Family, friends, somebody. Somebody out there knows something about her. Please tell some... I can't. Doris, I don't know what to do.
I can't believe this is happening.
I promise we're gonna find her. I promise. So we're gonna find her.
John was a caring person. He loved me, and I loved John. I think he was overly protective of Davina and me.
Dolores had a close relationship with John. She even told him he was like a son to her.
I met Davina's mother and, her family, and they were very, very nice people, just down-to-earth kind of people we like to have around this part of the country.
Please do me a favor and call me if you hear from her. I'm really getting worried at this point.
By the Tuesday morning after her disappearance, folks are starting to fear the worst.
You got anything new? No, I was hoping you guys had something.
We went down 975 along the river. We got nothing.
All right.
They were running out of options where to go, and John told them that they needed to go across the river. So they got permission to go over there, and they went under the 4 Mile Bridge.
What about going down under 190 into the swamp?
We're fixing on getting down there. I mean, I don't even know if we can get down there.
Look, please. It's the only place we haven't looked. Go check under 4 Mile Bridge.
So what time did you leave?
I don't know, it wasn't long after Davina and John left. I gotta get up early for work. I'm a pipe welder.
Did anybody see you come home?
I have no idea. I tell you what, though, around 1:30 in the morning, I get this message from John saying, like, where the hell is she or whatever. Look, the guy is crazy, okay?
Yeah, crazy. So, you want to take me through that again? Let's walk.
Seems Jason doesn't have much in the way of an alibi, and he hasn't exactly been chipping in on the dirty work looking for Davina. Back in the Atchafalaya, John's buddies are scrubbing through the muck of the swamp.
The people that hunt that area go down there from time to time, and maybe people that maintain the highways. But other than that, there's no public traffic. It's private property, and it's not real accessible.
It was so hot. I mean, it was July, it's full of mosquitoes, it's full of snakes. Every creature you can imagine, they are definitely there.
Davina! Davina!
The men aren't talking about it, but if Davina's down here, well, it ain't gonna be pretty.
Davina! 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 Hey, Phil? Phil, come here. What?
Right down there. Right by the water. You see that?
Yeah, what is that?
I don't know, just come on. Let's check it out.
Mark, I don't even know if that's her.
Well, that is somebody.
This was in July in Louisiana. The temperatures probably reached over 100 degrees, and she was there for almost 2 days. So her body was badly decomposed.
Oh, God, Mark, that smell, there's no way that's her. That body's been out here too long.
Phil, that is her. That's her.
What in the hell happened?
And then they realized it was her.
At this time, I was just crying uncontrollably.
I don't know what I was doing. I really don't know. I don't remember. I just really don't remember. It's kind of vague.
I can remember not wanting to leave. I remember pitching a fit because I wanted to see her, and I couldn't get to her.
It was just hard for them. They were heartbroken, and when you lose a loved one like that, it's just hard on you.
It took me a long time to believe it.
In Point Coupé Parish, homicide detective Ron Porcho's day is about to get real busy.
Porcho.
Yeah, Ron. We got a 419 under 4 Mile Bridge. Looks like it might be Davina Chapman.
Oh, Lord. On my way.
I mean, we all know that area. It's a swamp area and an area that's a great place to dump a body if you want to dump a body.
Kelly's Tavern is in St. Landry Parish, but that section of swamp under the 4 Mile Bridge is in Point Coupé Parish. So it looks like the detectives just inherited a homicide case.
Not dumped. See there? Looks like she moved some. Got some mud on her fingers there. You think she survived that? Maybe. For quite a while.
She laid there for approximately 6 hours and ultimately died of a splenic laceration. So ultimately bled to death.
No one would have heard anyone yelling down here. How would anyone know to help? Someone knew. Let's go ahead and process the scene. 10-4.
Detective Porcho calls in St. Landry Parish Detective Ivory Chevis, who's been handling the missing persons case.
Very sad.
Indeed.
Thanks for coming.
Detective Porcho, I'm glad you asked. Been chasing down alibis all day long. Davina had talked to some pipeline guys at Kelly's. They all checked out. As a matter of fact, one of those guys was on a phone sex line. from 10:40 to 2 o'clock a.m.
So it was occupied?
Well, Detective, I think we can say he was occupied, yes.
Oh, Lord. Now, what about this Jason Thibodeau?
Turns out, one of the few folks in Krotz Springs who never turned out to help look for Davina is Jason Thibodeau. And later, her autopsy will raise another red flag.
She had drugs in her system, and so the issue would have been that the drugs were supplied to her by Jason Thibodeau.
I think I see where you're going with this.
Hours ago, Davina Chapman's battered body was discovered at the base of 4 Mile Bridge in Louisiana's Atchafalaya Swamp. But before doubling back to their main suspect, Jason Thibodeau, Detective Pourchot checks in with the guys who found the body.
Fellas, y'all okay?
Yeah, still can't believe it.
We're fine. Have you guys called John?
You know, if he hadn't told us to look by 4 Mile Bridge,
Wait,
we'd still...
he told you to look down here.
John told us to look a lot of places. Why?
That's an old adage, when you hear hooves, think horses, not zebras.
Like I was telling him, we got into an argument in the parking lot and I left. When I came back, she was gone.
Seems nobody saw Davina inside Kelly's when she walked out with you.
Yeah, which is why I think she got in the car with somebody else.
Why?
Why?
Why? I mean, she knew over a dozen people in the bar. I mean, your cousin, his wife. She even knew the bar owner. Why would she get in the car with someone she didn't know?
She was drunk?
How'd you know she was under 4 Mile, John?
I didn't.
You told your friends to look there, though, right?
You don't get it! I didn't kill her. I couldn't stop her. She just jumped.
Wait, from the beginning.
Yeah, we had an argument in the parking lot.
Wasted, Davina!
Forget it! I'm not going with you!
Yes, you are!
No, I'm not!
I thought she'd calm down while we were driving home, but she didn't. She got more wild.
According to him, she opens the door. And it opens the door, it causes him to stop right in the middle of the 4 Mile Bridge. She takes off running by him, runs to the edge of the bridge, and tips over and falls.
He made it sound like she was trying to jump over the bridge and kill herself. And he said he had her hand and he couldn't hold her, and she went over.
I didn't know what to do. I was sure she was dead.
The problem with that theory, Mr. Snyder, was the side of the bridge is 5 feet tall. She was 4 foot 8 inches tall. You can't tip over 4 inches, whatever the difference is from 4 foot 8 to 5 feet.
And that's it? I mean, come on, John. You didn't try to call anybody or anything?
I couldn't. I drove around trying to figure out what I was gonna say, how I was gonna tell her mom. What? You don't believe me?
You under arrest.
Wait, why?
Stay still, or this might hurt.
By admitting he was there when she died and not calling for help, John's already up the swamp without a paddle. But Pourchot finds more damning evidence in Davina's autopsy report. She fell onto her left side, but she's got a broken bone by her right eye, which means someone punched her good before she fell.
Want to see what we got on the truck?
Yeah, and tell me about the blood.
According to this report, it's all over the passenger side, and we found a bloody handprint on the hood.
Hers?
His handprint, her blood. And we got more splatter on the windshield where it cracked. Yeah, take a look.
It was Davina's blood, it was Davina's DNA, and it was enough for me to say, that's him.
Finally, it's the hard evidence Detective Porchot has been looking for.
We got it.
Now, he has a pretty good idea of what happened to Davina Chapman. And it ain't pretty.
Davina Chapman was having a great time at Kelly's Tavern. And a bunch of guys were in town, a bunch of people were in town, everybody was having a great time. And that in and of itself was enough to spark the rage in this animal to cause him to anoint himself God and suck the life out of that child.
Are you kidding? Davina. Forget it. I'm not going with you. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Are you kidding? Stop! John, you're not touching me that way. Get the car. Stop! Now. Stop! God. Oh my God. Oh I'm bleeding. I'm bleeding. Are you kidding? Are you crazy? You're making me bleed. Why do you have to make me so mad? Stop! Why can't you listen? Why can't you listen? Are you kidding me? Let me out!
He himself was presumed to have been on steroids and things of that nature. One of the witnesses, Sam Snyder, who was at the Kelly Tavern, stated that John appeared to have been high on some drugs himself that night.
Come on out of here! Stop! You're going! Stop! Stop!
The 30-foot fall ruptured Davina's liver and spleen, but according to the autopsy, it didn't kill her.
I think that is probably one of the hardest things for me to swallow, is that he could have saved her.
And he left her for 2 days to rot like a piece of garbage. And he told no one. And he just left her there. So if he's not guilty of anything else, he's guilty of knowing that she was there and didn't try and help her.
It takes just a few hours for the jury to reach a verdict. Larry John Snyder is declared guilty of murder in the second degree.
When you juxtapose this murder to all the other ones that we prosecuted, this one tells me that domestic abuse is a definite precursor to something more dangerous down the road.
When he was sentenced, they give him life without the possibility of parole. I mean, he's going to, the way they said it, he will leave and go in a pine box. So that's all I wanted.
Christmas morning in the Carolina Hills should have sounded gentle. It should have begun with stove heat rising slowly through a wooden house, with frost loosening its grip on the yard, with children stepping lightly over rough planks and their stockings, whispering over wrapped gifts and oranges and the promise of a rare, bright day. It should have smelled of coffee and smoke and cured ham, of clean winter air pushing in through the cracks around the door. It should have been a day for church clothes, for family photographs, for neighbors nodding to one another across narrow roads cut through the land. Instead, in the last stretch of December 1929, on a patch of North Carolina ground where the fields lay stiff and silver beneath the cold, Christmas came wrapped in something darker, something so intimate and so incomprehensible that nearly a century later, the name Lawson still seems to carry a chill inside it. Long after the footsteps vanished from the yard and the gunshots stopped echoing across the hills, long after the blood dried in the house and in the trees and along the frozen path, people kept returning to the same terrible image: a family gathered for Christmas, and a father moving among them with death already decided in his mind. There are murders that belong to alleys, to drunken brawls, to jealousy in the dark, to greed hidden behind false smiles. Then there are the crimes that seem to strike at the most guarded place in human life, the small domestic center where people believe they are safest. Those are the ones that linger. Those are the ones that people lower their voices to discuss, even generations later, because they do not merely describe violence. They describe betrayal in its most absolute form. The Lawson family murders endure for that reason. They happened not in some lawless wilderness, but inside the idea of home. Not on a nameless day, but on Christmas. Not between strangers, but between a father and the people who depended on the sound of his step, the lift of his hand, the direction of his voice. In the memory of the South, in the folklore of true crime, in the uneasy imagination of anyone who has ever sat around a family table and believed routine itself was a kind of shelter. The case remains fixed, like a stain that never fully faded. Before the bloodshed, there was a winter morning like countless others in rural North Carolina, the sort of morning that held its breath before sunrise. The land around Germantown did not offer much softness in late December. The fields were stripped down to their bones. Bare branches scratched at the sky like black ink strokes. The roadways were hard with cold and worn by wagon wheels and boots. A house stood within that bleakness, plain and practical. The kind built not for beauty, but for use. A farmhouse that knew labor in every board. Nothing about it suggested it would enter history. Nothing in the shape of the roof or the line of the fence or the sag of the outbuildings marked it as a future monument to sorrow. Yet houses sometimes become something else after violence touches them. They stop being places and turn into containers of memory. Every nail seems to hold a secret. Every doorway feels like a witness. Every shadow becomes suspect. On that Christmas day, the Lawson home would become one of those places, a site people would revisit in their minds with the mixture of horror and fascination, as though the cold itself had preserved the moment. Charlie Lawson, by every outward appearance, was a working man who had built something out of hard seasons and hard soil. He had a wife, he had children. He had responsibilities as solid and repetitive as sunrise, in photographs from that era. Men like him often look older than their years, as if weather and labor had rubbed away all softness early. Their faces are set not because they are emotionless, but because life has taught them that tenderness is a luxury rarely afforded to those who must keep families fed. It is easy, from the distance of modern time, to flatten such a man into a symbol before the story even begins. Monster, madman, rural patriarch. But the terror of this case does not come from easy labels. It comes from the fact that whatever Charlie Lawson was on that Christmas morning, he was also a husband whose wife knew the sound of his breathing at night, and a father whose children had spent years reading his moods, waiting for his approval, accepting his authority as naturally as they accepted winter, or hunger, or Sunday. The most frightening crimes are often those that do not announce themselves with an obvious mask. They emerge from a face everyone thought they understood. That is why the Lawson murders live in uneasy territory between documented history and myth. People want a reason large enough to explain the scale of the betrayal. They want one clue that will open the locked door. They want a final note, a confession, an undeniable motive. Instead, the case leaves behind fragments, rumors, gestures, possibilities. A family portrait taken not long before the killings has become one of the most unsettling images in American crime history for precisely that reason. It shows the Lawsons composed and arranged, fixed in that serious, old-fashioned stillness required by cameras of the time. Their best clothes are on. Their hair is in place. The children are gathered. They look from a distance like what so many families longed to be in 1929, respectable, surviving, together. Yet hindsight turns the photograph into something almost unbearable. The neat collars and small hands and composed faces no longer suggest pride alone. They suggest a countdown none of them could see. Every ordinary detail becomes sinister once you know what came after. The folds of fabric, the angle of a child's shoulder, the father's presence among them. It is one thing to hear of murder in abstract terms. It is another to look into the faces of those who were still alive when the shutter clicked, to know that the same season of celebration in which that image was made would soon be split open by gunfire. The Christmas setting deepens the horror in a way few other dates could. Holiday violence always lands differently because it contaminates ritual. Christmas is not merely a day on a calendar. It is expectation. It is memory rehearsed and passed down. It is food set aside for the special meal. Clothes chosen for the visit. Children counting the hours until morning. It is the brief insistence, even in poor households and hard times, that joy deserves a place. When a massacre unfolds against that backdrop, the contrast sharpens every edge. Pine boughs, gifts, church-going, family meals, winter sunlight. All the symbols of warmth begin to look fragile and defenseless. In the Lawson story, Christmas does not soften the crime. It makes it feel like an act against the very idea of sanctuary. The date enters the case not as decoration, but as a wound. It is impossible to separate the murders from the day on which they occurred. Because Christmas made the family gather, made the household focus inward, made trust feel natural. The holiday did not cause the violence, but it gave the violence its cruelest frame. And so the story never settled into the archives as just another homicide case from the rural South. It became a legend retold at kitchen tables, in newspaper columns, by historians, by tourists, by people drawn to mysteries that refuse to die. Over the decades, the Lawson murders gathered the strange afterlife that true crime cases often do in America, especially those that unfold in isolated places and leave behind unanswered questions. Details were repeated until they took on the rhythm of folklore. Some were factual, some embellished, some half-believed, because they helped the mind bear the unbearable. The family's name lingered in local memory. The house, the graves. The story itself became part of a landscape that could not wholly release it. This is not unusual when violence erupts inside a family. Communities do not know where to place such acts. A robbery can be blamed on greed. A feud can be traced through anger. But when a father destroys his own household, the ordinary language of cause and effect begins to fail. People circle the event rather than step inside it. They ask whether there were signs, whether illness was involved, whether shame played a role, whether rage had been brewing in silence for years, whether some secret, too painful or too scandalous to speak aloud, lay buried beneath the polished surface of family respectability. The questions multiply because the answers remain incomplete, and incompleteness is its own form of haunting. For those who study old crimes, the Lawson case has all the elements that make a story persist. A closed domestic world, a single devastating day. A remote rural setting, children among the dead. A cultural moment balanced between old ways and modern curiosity, and above all, an elusive motive. But for all the fascination, the case should begin not with speculation, but with the human shape of what was lost. A mother whose day should have been filled with chores and children and holiday meals. Children who should have been measuring Christmas not in fear, but in small treasures and familiar routines. A family that, from the outside, stood close enough to one another to be photographed as a unit, close enough to share labor, weather, and hunger. Close enough for catastrophe to move among them swiftly. There is a particular sadness in crimes involving children, because children exist inside trust so completely. Their world is small by necessity. It is made of rooms, paths, fences, voices, faces. They do not evaluate danger the way adults do. They accept the structure given to them. In a family, that structure begins with the parents. A father is not simply another person in the room. He is, to a child, part of the architecture of life. That is what makes family annihilation so psychologically shattering, even to outsiders. It is not only that lives were taken. It is that the hand meant to protect became the hand that destroyed. The mind recoils because it understands instinctively that something foundational has been reversed. The Lawson story also belongs to a particular American time, a period when rural families lived close to hardship and close to one another. When privacy could hide both tenderness and trouble, when reputation mattered, when pain was often swallowed rather than spoken. North Carolina in 1929 was not merely a backdrop, but a pressure system of its own. Land demanded labor. Families relied on hierarchy, faith, custom, and silence all carried weight. Men were expected to endure. Women were expected to hold households together under strain. Children grew up early. In such places, a family might appear solid, even while cracks spread beneath the surface. Because there was little room for confession, and even less room for public disgrace. That does not explain murder. Nothing truly does, but it helps us understand how a terrible act could emerge from behind the familiar face of ordinary life, and leave neighbors stunned not only by grief, but by disbelief. They had known the family as a family. They had seen them in the ordinary pattern of local existence. Perhaps that, more than anything, is why the murder struck with such force. Evil from a stranger can be feared. Evil from within the household scrambles the moral map. It leaves behind not just mourning, but confusion. And confusion has a long memory. On the morning before the story reached its point of no return, the world around the Lawson home would have looked almost painfully still. Winter sunlight in the south has a pale, watchful quality, especially after a hard night of cold. It does not flood the earth so much as touch it cautiously, revealing frost on stubble, revealing smoke lifting from chimneys, revealing the plain truth of every object. A woodpile, a gate, a yard marked with footpaths, clothing hanging stiff. Somewhere a dog barking, somewhere a wagon wheel scraping. Somewhere, children moving with the restless energy that Christmas gives them. The quiet of country places can be deceptive. It can feel peaceful from a distance while hiding tension close at hand. In retrospect, people always search the silence for warning. Was there something in Charlie Lawson's expression that morning? Something in the way he moved. Did the cold air seem sharper than usual? Did one of the children hesitate? Did his wife notice any oddness in his voice? Any strain in his posture? Any look that did not belong to the day? These questions are natural, but they also reveal our helplessness. We want the story to contain a visible crack before the collapse. We want some sign that the unimaginable announced itself. Yet many catastrophes arrive wearing the face of routine. That may be the most frightening truth of all. The hook of the Lawson family murders is not just that a man killed his wife and children on Christmas Day. It is that the scene was domestic, seasonal, familiar. and therefore defenseless. It is that a date associated with warmth became inseparable from cold violence. It is that the motive remains clouded enough to invite endless return. It is that an old photograph still seems to tremble under the weight of what it does not show. It is that the case stands at the crossroads of history and nightmare, where facts can be listed but never made comfortable. To enter this story is to step into a house where the ordinary objects of family life have been transformed by memory into relics of dread. A doorway is no longer a doorway, but the place someone passed through before dying. A room is no longer a room, but a silence after a gunshot. A patch of yard is no longer earth, but the last ground beneath small shoes on a Christmas morning. And at the center of it stands Charlie Lawson, not yet fully explained. Perhaps never fully explainable, holding within one human frame the contradiction that makes this case endure. A father and destroyer, a provider and executioner. A man seen by his community, and yet somehow unknown where it mattered most. That contradiction is where the story begins. In the space between the life a family seemed to have and the horror that was waiting for them inside it. In the winter air, before the first shot. In the frozen stillness of a Christmas day that should have been remembered for blessings and instead became a permanent American ghost. The land around Germantown did not flatter anyone. It told the truth in hard lines and winter colors, in fields stripped back to the root and woods standing bare against a pale December sky. In 1929, this part of North Carolina was not the sort of place where life could be lived accidentally. Every meal had to be worked for. Every board in a house had meaning because someone had cut it, hauled it, nailed it into place. Every garment was worn with the memory of labor still stitched into it. Families did not simply inhabit the countryside, they negotiated with it day after day. Season after season, through heat, mud, poor harvests, sickness, and debt. By Christmas, the year had usually taken its toll. The fields had gone quiet, but the silence was not peace so much as exhaustion. Smoke from chimneys drifted low in the cold. The roads were rough and familiar. Neighbors lived close enough to know one another's names and fortunes, but not always close enough to know what sat unsaid behind a family's front door. It was a world shaped by duty, routine, religion, pride, and endurance. And in that world, the Lawson family existed not as a legend, yet. Not as a future headline, but as another household trying to stand upright in difficult times. To understand why the case struck the region with such lasting force, one has to understand the setting that held it. Because the murders did not happen in a vacuum. They happened in a place where family was not a sentimental idea, but an economic unit, a moral structure, and a public identity all at once. A man's worth was measured by what he could provide, what he could build, what he could keep together. A woman's strength was often hidden in plain sight. In bread baked before dawn, and clothes mended by weak lamplight. In children fed, washed, and kept in line. In the quiet ability to absorb hardship without ceremony. Children were not ornamental, they were beloved. Yes, but also necessary to the rhythm of the home. Growing into chores almost as soon as they were old enough to stand steady and follow instruction. In such a world, the family did not merely represent love, it represented survival. That is what made its destruction feel so unnatural, so nearly sacrilegious. The Lawsons were, on the surface, recognizably part of this rural order. Charlie Lawson was a farmer, a husband, a father, a man whose life had been bent around work. His household was not rich. But by the standards of the area, it had shape and direction. There was land. There was a house. There were children. There was the visible form of respectability, and that mattered. In communities where money was scarce and opportunity narrower still, appearance was not trivial vanity. It was social evidence, good clothes worn to church, a steady posture before neighbors. Children kept reasonably presentable. All of it formed part of the fragile dignity families guarded fiercely. Public shame could spread like a stain. Public approval, even if modest, was a shield. The Lawson family, as remembered through photographs and local accounts, seemed to occupy that narrow space between struggle and aspiration, where people worked hard not only to eat, but to be seen as decent. The famous family photograph taken shortly before the murders captures more than faces. It captures ambition, order, and self-presentation. It is impossible to look at that image now without feeling the ache of hindsight. But at the time, it would have signaled something simpler and more hopeful. Here is a family dressed carefully. Here is a father, able or determined to pay for a formal photograph. Here are children arranged with care. In a year as brutal as 1929, when the country at large was tipping into economic disaster, such a photograph was not casual. It was a statement that the family existed, that it mattered, that it possessed enough stability to mark itself against time. That effort toward dignity now seems tragic because it preserved a final illusion of wholeness. Yet it also tells us something important about the context of the case. The Lawsons were not living outside society or beneath its notice. They were participating in its rituals, trying to inhabit its expectations. They looked like a family people recognized. They looked like they belonged. Rural North Carolina in the late 1920s carried older rhythms inside a changing America. Modernity had begun to spread, but unevenly. Cities moved faster, radios brought voices from elsewhere. Newspapers reached farther, automobiles shortened some distances. Yet in farming communities, the old forces still held strong. Weather could undo months of effort. Illness could wipe out savings or lives. Men often carried injuries without treatment, burdens without language, and tempers without interruption. Women bore not only children, but the accumulated strain of maintaining a household where scarcity was normal and rest was temporary. Silence had social value. People did not always speak aloud about what hurt them, what frightened them, or what humiliated them. Some of that silence was dignity. Some of it was fear. Some of it was simply habit. Inherited the way land was inherited, passed down until it felt natural. That silence matters in the Lawson story because whatever trouble lived inside that family, whether emotional, psychological, financial, or moral, it lived in a culture not especially built for disclosure. Pain could be endured in private for years. Secrets, if they existed, had room to grow in the dark. The year 1929 forms another invisible wall around the case. The stock market crash that autumn had already sent a shudder through the American imagination, though the full catastrophe of the Great Depression had not yet unfolded in every corner. Still, uncertainty was in the air for farming families. Prosperity had always been precarious, even in better times, and the broader national collapse only deepened the sense that life could turn without warning. One bad season, one illness, one debt, one humiliation, and everything could begin to slide. Whether Charlie Lawson felt that national unease directly or only through the daily arithmetic of rural hardship, he lived in a world where pressure was not abstract. It sat at the table. It followed a man into the field. It waited in the cost of food, in the wear on boots, in the need to keep children clothed, in the expectation that a father remained solid no matter what was moving beneath the surface. None of that excuses what he would do. But it helps create the atmosphere in which his mind, already, whatever it was, moved toward the edge. Communities like Germantown were held together not only by kinship and work, but by observation. People noticed who bought new fabric, who missed church, whose child looked thin, whose horse had gone lame, whose marriage seemed cold, whose debts were whispered about, whose fields yielded poorly. This was not idle gossip alone. Though gossip certainly existed, it was one of the ways isolated communities monitored themselves. Reputation was built from dozens of small impressions collected over time. A man did not need to commit a crime to be judged. He could be judged for weakness, for drunkenness, for laziness, for cruelty, for failing to command his household, for not paying what he owed, for letting his family appear disorderly. Such scrutiny could press inward on a person until public image became something to defend at all costs. The Lawson family appears to have moved within this culture of mutual visibility. That makes the mystery of motive even sharper. Because if Charlie Lawson was carrying distress or obsession, he may also have been carrying the need to conceal it. Outward order and inward collapse often live side by side longer than anyone suspects. The domestic structure of the Lawson home would have reflected the practical demands of the era. Days began early. Fires needed tending. Water had to be carried. Food had to be prepared from what was available. Children had chores according to age and ability. A wife's work was continuous and often invisible once completed. Clean clothes did not clean themselves. Floors did not sweep themselves. Meals did not appear by miracle. In winter, every small comfort required effort. Warmth required wood. Bread required flour and labor. Even celebration required planning. Christmas in such a household was not necessarily lavish, but that did not make it unimportant. On the contrary, scarcity often sharpened the meaning of holidays. A special meal, a bit of ribbon. An orange, a toy. A new piece of clothing. A day arranged around togetherness rather than ordinary toil. These things carried emotional weight far beyond their material value, for children especially. Christmas expanded the world. It interrupted the monotony of work and weather with suspense, ritual, and delight. That is why the date matters so much in the Lawson case. It did not merely provide a dramatic backdrop. It deepened the betrayal by placing violence inside a day built around trust and anticipation before the murders. The Lawson children would have lived within a landscape of rules and relationships that felt permanent. A child's sense of reality is built from repetition. The same walls, the same yard, the same voice calling from another room, the same mother's hands, the same father's steps returning at the end of the day. Even in poor families, maybe especially in poor families, routine becomes its own comforts. It tells children where safety is supposed to be. The Lawson children belonged to that pattern. They had chores, relationships with siblings, private dislikes, small loyalties, ordinary fears. Their lives were not symbols. They were daily lived realities, textured by the little events adults often overlook. A scraped hand, a shared joke between sisters. The smell of wool coats drying near the fire, mud on shoes. Hunger before supper, the pleasure of being allowed to dress up for a photograph. The excitement of Christmas drawing near, when later generations reduced such families to the single event that destroyed them. Something human is lost The context of the case requires resisting that flattening. This was not a tableau waiting to become famous. It was a functioning household whose members experienced themselves not as characters in a tragedy, but as people moving through a winter season. Charlie Lawson's position within that household would have been enormous. In modern discussions of family annihilation, people often search quickly for pathology, and sometimes that is warranted. But in 1929, the emotional authority of a father was reinforced by the culture around him. He was expected to command, decide, provide, and represent the family publicly. That authority did not always mean tenderness was absent. Many fathers loved deeply in reserved ways, but it did mean that fear, obedience, and dependence could gather around a man without anyone naming them clearly. If he became volatile, the family adjusted. If he became withdrawn, the family watched. If he brooded, others moved carefully. Rural life often left little room to escape a patriarch's moods. There were too many shared duties, too few private spaces, too much practical reliance. A wife might interpret, soften, or shield. Children might learn to read tone and posture with extraordinary skill. Yet all of that happened inside the home, often unseen from the outside. This is one reason family murders can shock neighbors so deeply. What the community knows is public behavior. What the family knows is atmosphere. Sometimes those two realities barely overlap. There has long been a fascination with what, if anything, in the Lawson household, foreshadowed disaster. Was Charlie more distant than usual? More intense? More erratic? Did his wife sense danger, but fail to imagine its scale? Did the children feel some subtle unease on the edges of the holiday? These questions haunt the case because they point to the ordinary threshold on which catastrophe often stands. Rarely does a household step from peace into slaughter without crossing smaller, invisible distances first. A man might grow quieter, more watchful, less like himself, or more intensely like some hidden self. But even when those shifts occur, families accustomed to hardship do not always identify them as warnings. They may see them as tiredness, worry, temper, stress, or simply another difficult patch. Context matters here too. In a culture where men were not encouraged to confess inner torment and women were expected to absorb strain, alarming behavior could be normalized until it was too late. The North Carolina countryside itself contributed to the aura that later settled over the case. Rural violence often acquires a mythic quality because the landscape seems to hold memory differently. In cities, crime can disappear into motion, swallowed by new construction, traffic, and anonymity. In the country, roads remain, fields remain. Trees stand long after witnesses die. A house can sit in the same weather for decades, its boards aging under the weight of story. The Lawson murders became inseparable from place in this way. The cold ground, the distances between buildings, the stillness of winter woods, all of it seemed to preserve the event. Even the season collaborated in the memory. December light is thin. Sound carries strangely in cold air. A gunshot in winter does not seem merely loud, it seems to split the day. Later retellings of the case draw power from this landscape because it frames the crime not as chaotic urban violence, but as something unfolding against stark, indifferent nature. The fields did not intervene. The trees did not speak. The sky simply watched. Another layer of context lies in the moral climate of the time. Religion shaped community life in rural North Carolina, not always as private devotion alone, but as social structure. Church-going mattered. Biblical language mattered. Concepts of sin, shame, duty, purity, and judgment were woven into everyday perception. A family's standing could be influenced by what people believed about its internal order. Secrets involving sexuality, pregnancy, or moral scandal could be devastating, not only emotionally, but socially. This does not prove any single theory about motive, but it does help explain why rumors later attached themselves so fiercely to the Lawson case. In communities governed by strict codes, hidden shame can feel unbearable, and when an inexplicable crime occurs, people naturally search for a hidden moral drama beneath it, whether those rumors were true, partly true, or entirely the product of collective anxiety. Their persistence reflects the context from which they emerged. People needed the murders to mean something. They needed the family's destruction to fit, somehow, into a narrative of sin, madness, dishonor, or concealment, because randomness was harder to live with. And yet the most unsettling possibility is often the simplest. That Charlie Lawson's mind became a chamber no one else could enter, not even those closest to him. Context can explain pressure, culture, silence, authority, and fear. It cannot finally decode the locked interior of one man on one day. Still, the world around him matters because it shaped how he was seen, how he saw himself, and how those around him may have responded to his changes. The farm, the season, the era, the family structure, the public expectations. All of these formed a stage on which the tragedy would arrive. They did not write the act, but they built the room in which it could be performed without immediate interruption. By the time Christmas Day came, the Lawson family stood inside a setting dense with meaning. They were not merely isolated individuals. They were a household in a rural Southern community during a hard historical moment, living under codes of respectability and endurance, moving through holiday rituals that emphasize togetherness. This context is essential because it transforms the murders from an isolated burst of violence into an event that seemed to tear through the fabric of an entire way of life. Neighbors did not just see dead bodies. They saw the collapse of assumptions that a father could turn on his own family, that Christmas could hold slaughter, that a respectable home could contain a secret no one had read correctly. The Lawson murders remain famous not only because they were brutal, but because they struck at the center of what the community believed family was supposed to be. The context, then, is not background scenery. It is part of the wound. In the frozen fields of North Carolina, in the hard economy of farm life, in the guarded pride of a working family, in the watchful eyes of a small community. The conditions gathered quietly around the Lawsons until what happened on Christmas Day seemed both impossible and, afterward, terrible in a way that felt woven into the place itself. That is how the case entered memory. Not as violence alone, but as violence emerging from a household that looked, for all the world, like one more family trying to survive the winter. Before the Lawson family became a story repeated in newspapers, argued over in barber shops, and carried forward in the uneasy folklore of American crime, they were a household made of ordinary human textures. And to understand the full weight of what was destroyed on that Christmas Day, the eye has to move away from the gun for a moment and return to the people who stood in its shadow. The dead are often reduced too quickly to roles in a case file. Wife, daughter, son, infant, victim. Such words are accurate, but they flatten life into labels. And the Lawson story resists that flattening because its horror depends on intimacy. These were not strangers crossing briefly through each other's lives. They were bound by years of shared meals, shared illness, shared winter cold, Shared labor. Shared laughter, too small and domestic to survive in historical records. They knew one another in the private ways only family members do. They knew how long someone took to rise in the morning, who spoke first at the supper table, which child dragged tired feet after a long day, who looked out the window when rain came down hard, who cried easily, who needed coaxing, who liked to stay near the warmth of the stove. In most historical murder cases, the dead are remembered through the violence that ended them. In this case, because it was a family annihilation. Remembering them properly means reconstructing the quiet rhythm of the home they inhabited before terror entered it. Fanny Lawson, Charlie's wife, stood at the center of that rhythm. A farm wife in rural North Carolina in 1929 was not simply a woman living in the country. She was an engine of endurance. Her labor began before daylight and often ended after everyone else in the house had gone still. She was expected to keep order in a place where disorder arrived daily through mud, weather, hunger, sickness, and the endless needs of children. Her work would have been so constant that much of it disappeared from notice the moment it was done. Bread on the table meant flour measured, dough worked, heat managed. Clean clothes meant water hauled, garments scrubbed, wrung, dried, folded. A swept floor meant a back bent with repetition. A fed household meant foresight, thrift, and a willingness to keep moving even when her own body begged for rest. Whatever private tenderness or private sorrow Fanny carried, the visible fact of her life was usefulness. In homes like hers, love often wore the plain clothes of duty. It appeared not in grand declarations, but in the consistency of hands that kept doing what needed to be done. There is a particular sadness in imagining such a woman at Christmas time, because even a modest holiday would have required extra effort from her, more food to prepare, more order to maintain, more excitement to manage among the children, perhaps clothes to straighten, hair to smooth, plans to remember. Christmas did not suspend work for mothers. It often increased it, yet it also brought moments of reward. The sight of children watching the day unfold, the brief lifting of routine into something special, the pride of presenting a household that, however simple, held together. Fanny would have known her children not as an abstract group, but as separate worlds, each with a different voice, different pace, different need. She would have known which one could be trusted with a task and which one wandered off halfway through it. Which one clung to her apron when strangers visited, which one wanted to appear older than he was. Which girl had begun to move with the self-consciousness of adolescence? Which child laughed with the whole body instead of just the mouth? That is what mothers know when they live closely with their children and build the household around them. It is one reason crimes like this remain so emotionally devastating. The victims were not merely loved in general, they were known in detail. The older children in the Lawson family occupied that fragile territory between childhood and responsibility. In farm families, age was measured not only in birthdays, but in usefulness. A child who could fetch, carry, sweep, gather, or watch a younger sibling had already entered the economy of the home. That did not erase innocence, but it shaped it. Childhood in such a house was mixed with expectation. There were chores to learn, manners to keep, elders to obey. And all of it formed character early, yet children still found ways to remain children. They made games out of work. They traded glances across rooms. They teased. They whispered. They found delight in small things, because small things were what life offered most regularly. A new ribbon, a rare sweet, the chance to wear fine clothes, The thrill of Christmas. The novelty of being photographed. These moments glowed brighter in households where luxury was rare. Marie, one of the Lawson daughters, and among the most remembered because of the rumors that later gathered around her name, stands in history with an added layer of unease that perhaps no dead young woman deserves. It is difficult now to separate the actual girl from the stories that came later, but before gossip made her symbolic. She was a daughter on the threshold of adulthood, living within the narrow possibilities available to rural girls of her time. At that age, a daughter begins to occupy a complicated position in a strict household. She is still a child under authority. Yet she is watched with the sharper attention reserved for young women entering visibility. Her clothes matter more. Her conduct matters more. The way she is seen by neighbors matters more. For a girl like Marie, daily life may already have included a growing awareness of the future, though not necessarily a hopeful one. Marriage, service, domestic labor, obedience, perhaps children of her own one day. The path ahead would not have seemed broad. Still, even within those confines, young women carried private selves. They dreamed, they imagined escape, romance, change, or simply a different version of the same life. They laughed with siblings. They helped their mother. They likely guarded some thoughts even from those closest to them. To picture Marie only as a figure in the later mystery is to miss the ordinary youth she inhabited first. She would have known the cold sting of wash water, the weight of chores, the stiffness of church clothes, the strange pride of being considered grown in some moments and still treated as a child in others. She would have had days that felt endless and moments that felt bright. She would have belonged to that house so completely that leaving it, even temporarily, meant carrying its habits within her. Younger Lawson children are harder for history to recover because children vanish quickly from the record unless they grow old enough to leave one. Yet that absence itself is heartbreaking. Their personalities must be imagined through the shape of family life. A little boy likely eager to imitate older brothers or please his father. Younger girls living close to their mother's orbit. A toddler or infant existing in that soft sphere of dependency where safety is assumed rather than reasoned. The smallest children in a family do not merely occupy space. They draw attention around them. Someone lifts them. Someone wipes their face. Someone hushes their crying. Someone laughs at the way they mispronounce words or wander toward danger without understanding it. In a household full of labor, little children are both burden and blessing, slowing the work while giving it purpose. Their presence changes the sound of a home. More footsteps, more sudden crying, more laughter in brief bursts, more interruptions. A child does not have to say anything profound to leave a mark. It is enough that she reached for a cup with 2 hands, enough that he ran when told to walk, enough that one always wanted to be carried when the others did not. The Lawson children would have filled that house with exactly these kinds of detail, now lost except in the most general form. The tragedy is not only that they died, it is that so much of who they were died with them because history had not thought to preserve it yet. Families are always full of tiny private knowledge, invisible from the outside. One child may have feared the dark. Another might have liked to stay near the kitchen while food was being prepared. One may have gone silent around visitors and wild with laughter once they left. Another may have carried a stubborn streak that appeared only when told to do something disliked. Such traits matter because they restore humanity to victims who are too easily overwhelmed by the scale of the crime. A massacre turns people into numbers if no one resists it. But the Lawson family was not a number. It was a collection of human temperaments, all held together under one roof by necessity, affection, authority, and habit. Their Christmas day should have been textured by ordinary anticipation. Perhaps some children woke earlier than usual, restless with excitement. Perhaps clothes had been laid out. Perhaps the older girls were already helping with food or tidying. Perhaps someone asked repeatedly when gifts would be opened, or whether they were going visiting, or who would come by. Holiday mornings in poor but functioning homes often carried a special brightness, not because abundance overflowed, but because expectation itself became precious. Even the smallest treat felt amplified. An orange in winter could seem luxurious. A toy could become the center of a child's imagination for weeks. A new dress, a piece of candy, a pocket knife, a cap, a ribbon. These were not minor things to children accustomed to little. And so the victims of the Lawson case should be imagined first inside that current of expectation, not already inside the violence. That is how betrayal truly measures itself, against what the victims believed the day was supposed to be. For Fanny, the emotional geography of the family would likely have been far more complex than anyone outside the house ever saw. A wife in her position would have read Charlie closely, perhaps more closely than the children did. Because adult life trains women in such homes to read danger from small signs, a silence held too long, a look that does not settle naturally, irritability, restlessness, a way of moving through the yard that suggests thoughts elsewhere. Whether Charlie had shown such signs in a manner that could be recognized clearly, no one can say with certainty. But wives often live inside atmospheres outsiders only discover after disaster. If Fanny sensed something wrong in the days before Christmas, she may not have had language for it. Or she may have had language but no structure in which to use it. Married women in rural 1929 North Carolina did not move through the world with modern assumptions about leaving, reporting, or naming emotional instability. Marriage was endurance. And endurance often meant translating unease into routine. If a husband was troubled, a wife adjusted. If he was angry, she calmed the room. If he withdrew, she carried the household anyway. This does not mean Fanny lived in constant fear. It means her position required vigilance, whether or not anyone called it that. Her victimhood began before death, in the sense that she stood at the center of a system that demanded trust while giving her little protection if that trust turned deadly. The children, too, would have lived within Charlie's moods, as weather one could not control. Children in patriarchal homes become experts at sensing authority. They know whether a father's return means ease or tension. They know when to make noise and when to quiet down. They know which parent can be approached with a request and which must be avoided at certain moments, if Charlie Lawson had become more intense or more remote. The children may have registered it not as an omen, but as another one of the adult conditions they had to navigate. Children do not usually interpret danger in philosophical terms. They respond behaviorally. They stay closer to one another. They become quieter. They seek their mother more often. Or, if no direct threat has yet materialized, they go on being children because the mind protects itself through normality. That possibility is especially painful here. The Lawson children may have walked into their final morning still believing in the day ahead, still operating inside the deep trust that family life had built within them over years. The family photograph taken shortly before the murders becomes, in this context, less a piece of evidence than a witness to all that remained unspoken. Viewers today study it for clues, for tension, for hints of what was coming, but photographs are often poor prophets. They are better at capturing surfaces than storms. Still, the image reveals one important truth. The family had enough coherence to gather itself for posterity. The children are dressed carefully. The arrangement suggests intention, preparation, perhaps even pride. for the victims, especially the children. That photograph may have been an event in itself, standing still, wearing better clothes, being told where to look, feeling the stiffness that comes when a family tries to present its best version of itself for a child. Such moments can feel formal and exciting at once. No one in that frame appears to know how close death is. That is why the image unsettles so deeply. It preserves not fear, but ordinary vulnerability. Another way to understand the victims is to imagine the sensory world they inhabited daily. The Lawson home would have been filled with smells tied to survival. Wood smoke, damp wool, soap, cooked meat when available, dirt tracked in on boots, cold air sliding through door cracks, perhaps kerosene, perhaps the sourness of wet clothes drying too slowly in winter. Sounds would have included a baby crying, children moving across bare floors, dishes, the creak of a chair, a fire settling, distant animals, Charlie's step, Fanny's voice calling instructions, the door opening to hard weather. Such details matter because they ground the victims in life rather than legend. Each person killed that day had moved through those sounds and smells as part of a fully inhabited existence. Each had preferences, habits, irritations, comforts, even the youngest, whose biographies history cannot reconstruct, existed as a center of feeling. Warmth pleased them, hunger hurt them. Familiar arms calmed them, loud voices likely frightened them. This is what makes intrafamilial murder so morally disorienting. The victims did not have to decide whether to trust the man who killed them. Trust had already been built into their bodies long before they were old enough to question it, in cases with adult victims alone. People sometimes retreat to the cold comfort of imagining choice. Why didn't she leave? Why didn't he fight back? Why didn't they see it coming? Family massacres involving children expose the cruelty of such thinking. Children cannot leave the architecture of authority that contains them. And mothers, however strong, are often trapped within practical, cultural, and emotional structures outsiders underestimate. So when speaking of the Lawson victims, it is not enough to name them dead. They must be recognized as people enclosed by relationships that should have protected them and instead became the channels through which death arrived. That is the emotional core of Part 3. The victim's story is not one of passive existence awaiting disaster. It is the story of a family living, working, dressing for Christmas, being photographed, eating, speaking, laboring, expecting the day to go forward according to the ordinary laws of home. Fanny was not merely Charlie Lawson's wife. She was the keeper of a domestic world held together under strain. Marie was not merely a daughter attached to later speculation. She was a young woman standing at the tense border between girlhood and whatever adult life would ask of her. The younger children were not background figures, but living centers of dependence, play, obedience, and developing personality. Together, they made a household. They created the emotional weather of the home as surely as Charlie did. They filled its rooms, altered its silences, and gave its routines purpose. That is why the loss feels total. Charlie Lawson did not just take lives. He extinguished a world small enough to fit inside one farmhouse and large enough to contain everything those children had ever known. When the killings finally came, the public would encounter the victims all at once through horror. But in truth, they had existed before that horror in the most ordinary and therefore most sacred way possible, as family. As people engaged in the daily act of living beside one another, expecting another meal, another dawn, Another season. Another Christmas. The unbearable sadness of their story lies there. In that expectation. In the simple fact that on the morning they were killed, each of them still belonged to a future they assumed would arrive. Christmas Day arrived over the Lawson property with the kind of cold that seems to sharpen every edge of the world. The fields lay pale and brittle beneath a low winter light, and the bare trees held themselves still, their branches black against a washed-out sky. Frost clung to the ground in the shaded places. The yard around the house looked hard and silent, marked by the familiar tracks of boots and small feet, by the daily geography of a farm family moving through work and weather. It should have been a day of pause, or something close to it, even in homes where labor never truly stopped. Christmas carried a slight change in the air, a different pacing of the morning, a sense that the ordinary burdens of the season had been pushed back just enough to let anticipation breathe. Inside the Lawson household, there would have been the small, bright current that children bring to a holiday, even if the gifts were modest and the room itself plain. Better clothes had been worn recently for the family photograph, and the memory of that little ceremony may still have lingered in the children's minds. They were a family moving through what ought to have been one of the most intimate, most protected days of the year. That is what gives the incident its enduring force. The murders did not interrupt chaos. They interrupted ritual. They broke into a day built around trust. Charlie Lawson had already made up his mind. That is perhaps the most chilling truth beneath every later retelling of the case. While the family moved through the Christmas morning with whatever mixture of chores, excitement, and quiet domestic motion belonged to it, Charlie was no longer sharing their understanding of the day. He had crossed inwardly into another place, one his wife and children could not see. Whether his decision had formed slowly over days or struck him with a terrible clarity in a shorter span, by the time the morning unfolded, he was not merely a troubled man. He was a man arranging death within the shape of family life. The house, the yard, the paths between one task and another. All of these familiar spaces were becoming part of a design known only to him. That is why the crime feels so coldly intimate. He did not lash out in sudden public rage. He moved within the household's ordinary patterns and used those patterns to bring his family within reach. One by one, accounts of the murders, as they have come down through time, describe a sequence that was methodical, almost unbearably controlled. The killings began outside the house, in the winter yard and along the path near the tobacco barn, where two of the Lawson daughters were sent or allowed to go out. It was Christmas Day, and perhaps their minds were on errands, on returning quickly to the house, on whatever small duties or holiday expectations still structured the morning. They would not have walked into the cold expecting danger from the man whose authority had guided the household all their lives. This is the essential wound at the center of the incident. These were not victims fleeing an obvious threat. They were children and young women still operating within the logic of home. When Charlie Lawson raised the shotgun, the betrayal was already complete before the first blast even struck. The reports of the murders tell of the two girls being shot and then bludgeoned, an added layer of violence that suggests not frenzy exactly, but a grim determination to leave no chance of survival. The cold air must have cracked with the sound, sharp and final in the stillness of the holiday morning. In country places, gunfire is not unheard of. But context matters. A shot on a farm does not always mean alarm. That fact, too, may have worked in Charlie's favor in the first moments. The land itself did not cry out. The fields only held the sound for a moment and let it go, somewhere in or near the house. The rest of the family remained within the ordinary rhythm of the day, not yet fully aware that the first blow had already fallen. After killing the girls outside, Charlie turned back toward the house. At this point, the crime passed from ambush into annihilation. The yard. The doorway. The familiar threshold across which family members had moved countless times. All became part of a narrowing corridor leading toward death. Inside the home were Fanny and the younger children. A mother on Christmas morning in 1929 would have been occupied in the 1,000 practical ways mothers always are, attending to food, order, movement, and noise. She could not have known that the man returning toward her was no longer carrying the day forward, but bringing it to its end. When Charlie entered or approached the house to continue the killings, the domestic center of the family, the place where warmth and routine should have gathered most strongly, became the stage for the deepest violation. Fanny Lawson was killed near the porch or within the house's immediate space, depending on the version recounted. And then the younger children were murdered in turn. The sequence matters less than the atmosphere it creates. A confined domestic world collapsing almost instantly under a force rising from within it. The mother who had held the household together could not protect it. The children who would have run instinctively toward the nearest adult's safety found none. The rooms that should have sheltered them became traps. In cases of family murder, there is always a temptation to imagine resistance in heroic terms. But reality is usually much crueler. Events move too quickly. Recognition comes too late. The authority of the killer confuses the victim for a fatal instant. Children freeze, cry, or flee without strategy. A mother's first response may be disbelief, then a desperate effort to reach one child while another is already in danger. It is likely that terror entered the Lawson house not as a sustained scene, but as a sequence of unbearable shocks. A shot, a scream, a move, the sight of Charlie armed. The impossible realization arriving too late to be acted on fully. Then more shots. More panic. More the younger children, among them little ones too young to grasp what was happening, were killed as part of this same deliberate campaign. The fact that the murders included very young children is one reason the case never settled into mere historical curiosity. It stripped away every possible claim to a crime of passion narrowly understood. This was extermination of a family. Charlie was not eliminating a rival or striking one target in rage. He was erasing his household. Each child murdered made that intention clearer. There is something especially awful in the thought of a small child on Christmas morning, confronted not by an outside intruder, but by the father whose presence had defined safety. Even if the child did not understand the sequence of events, the body would have understood fear. The raised voice, the blast, the collapse of the room in the chaos, the absence of the mother's protection. Yet Charlie did not kill everyone. One of the sons, Arthur, survived because he was away from the house on an errand or visit. This surviving absence gives the incident another strange and haunting contour. Charlie had not failed in a moment of confusion. He had a list in his head, a structure to what he was doing. And when the killings inside the house were complete, he turned his attention toward waiting for Arthur's return. That decision places the massacre in an even colder light. He intended to finish the work. The house behind him now held the bodies of his wife and most of his children. The holiday morning had been replaced by stillness of another kind. The stillness that follows impossible violence, when rooms are full of absence even before anyone else has entered them. And Charlie Lawson, instead of fleeing immediately or collapsing in visible madness, stationed himself to continue. Accounts say he waited in the woods or near the property, armed and ready for Arthur. That image has lingered in the imagination of everyone who has ever studied the case. A father surrounded by the silence created by his own murders, watching for the return of the last intended victim. Winter woods have a particular starkness, without leaves, They conceal less, and yet still seem full of hiding places. A man standing there with a gun on Christmas Day, listening for footsteps, becomes almost more apparition than human in the mind. He had crossed so completely out of the shared moral world of his family that he could pause after slaughter and hold himself prepared for more. What went through his mind during those moments is unknowable. Perhaps he believed he was completing some grim necessity. Perhaps his thoughts were splintered, feverish, unstable. Perhaps he was clinging to a terrible internal logic that made the surviving son feel like unfinished business. But whatever his precise mental state, the waiting itself reveals control. It reveals direction. This was not a man blindly running from his own violence. It was a man pursuing its conclusion. Arthur's absence spared him. The son did not return within the window Charlie expected. And that missed timing became the difference between life and death. So much in old murder cases turns on chance in this brutal way. A delayed step, a different errand. A horse taking longer, a neighbor stopping to talk. Arthur lived not because mercy entered the scene, but because timing did. That kind of survival carries its own lifelong wound. To be the child who lived because he was absent is to bear a form of grief entangled with accident. Later years can offer no clean comfort for it. The mind returns endlessly to the same questions. What if I had come home sooner? What if he had found me? What if I had been there when it began? In the Lawson story, Arthur's survival ensured that the family was not wholly erased. But it also preserved a human witness to the magnitude of what had been destroyed. After waiting and failing to catch Arthur, Charlie Lawson turned the violence upon himself. He went into the woods and used the shotgun to end his own life. This final act has often been folded into the narrative as the expected close of a family annihilation, but it deserves its own consideration. Suicide after murder can be read as guilt, despair, fear of capture, or the final step in a self-contained delusion. In Charlie's case, it deepened the mystery rather than resolved it. He left no complete explanation that could settle motive beyond dispute. He died, taking the center of the story with him. And that silence became almost as enduring as the massacre itself. His body, found after the murders were discovered, completed the physical map of the crime. Family dead at the house. Father dead in the woods. Christmas broken beyond repair. The incident, in its raw sequence, lasted only a short portion of one day. That is another fact the mind struggles with. A family built over years was destroyed in minutes. Morning became nightmare with astonishing speed. Domestic life is vulnerable in exactly this way. It depends on repetition, on trust, on the assumption that the next minute will resemble the one before it closely enough to remain manageable. Violence shatters that assumption at once. In the Lawson home, the ordinary sounds of Christmas Day were replaced by gunfire. Panic, then silence. A table may still have stood waiting for food. Clothing may have hung where it had been placed earlier. Objects remained in their positions, but the meaning of every object was altered because the people who gave the house life were gone. The incident also carried a theatrical cruelty in how it used space. The outside yard first, then the house, then the woods. The progression feels almost ritualistic in retrospect, though not in any sacred sense. Rather, it moved through the total environment of the family's life. The daughter is outside in the winter light, the mother and younger children at the domestic core. The surviving intended son awaited from concealment, the father's own body finally placed apart from the others, yet inseparable from them in death. No corner of the family's world escaped the reach of the crime. Every setting associated with ordinary life that day became part of the murder's geography. for neighbors and later investigators. This must have added to the nightmare quality of the discovery. The massacre was not contained to one room. It spread across the places the family had inhabited naturally. The timing of the murders on Christmas Day magnified every detail. Had the killings occurred on an ordinary workday, the horror would still have been immense, but the holiday sharpened the contrast almost beyond endurance. Christmas gathers families inward. It lowers suspicion. It wraps routine in sentiment and expectation. Children rise believing in gift, in meal, and closeness. Mothers extend themselves to create warmth. Fathers are expected, at the very least, to remain inside the domestic compact the day symbolizes. Charlie Lawson did the opposite. He exploited the family's gathered vulnerability, using the intimacy of the holiday as cover for destruction. That is why the incident has never seemed merely brutal. It has seemed profane. There is also the question of what the victims may have understood in their final seconds. This cannot be known with precision, and speculation should stay respectful. But one truth seems unavoidable. Recognition must have arrived unevenly. The first two daughters outside may have had almost no time at all. Fanny, inside, may have seen enough to understand more. The older children may have recognized danger in the moment they saw Charlie armed or saw their mother fall. The youngest likely experienced only terror without full comprehension. This unevenness makes the scene even sadder. Not everyone died inside the same awareness. Some may have died in shock before fear could fully settle. Others may have had an instant in which the unimaginable became real. Father's doing this. The person from whom protection should come is the source of death. That realization, even if brief, is part of what makes family murder uniquely horrifying. The incident ended with stillness. But it did not end cleanly. No such massacre ever does. The Christmas light kept moving across the yard. The cold remained. The house stood where it had always stood, yet nothing in that landscape was ordinary any longer. What had happened there was too intimate, too total, too strange in its method and timing to settle easily into explanation, even before neighbors began to gather and the news started its long travel outward. The incident had already entered the deeper register of tragedy. It was not only a crime scene. It was a ruined household, the mother's work silenced, the children's voices extinguished, the surviving son cut away from the family by chance alone, the father dead without giving the world an answer proportionate to the devastation he caused. That is part 4 of the Lawson story. Not the rumors that would come later, not the evidence sifted afterward, not the theories about motive, but the incident itself. A Christmas morning in rural North Carolina turns methodically into massacre by the man at the center of the family, beginning in the cold yard, moving into the house, pausing in the woods, and ending in a silence so absolute that it seemed to swallow not only a household, but the meaning of the day on which it occurred. By the time the Lawson property stopped being a place and became a scene, the violence itself was already over. What remained was the silence after it. And there are few silences more disturbing than the one that settles over a family home when death has moved through it faster than comprehension. Christmas Day still lay over the land with its pale winter light. But the meaning of the day had been broken beyond repair. The house stood as it had stood that morning. Plain, work-worn. Built for use rather than beauty. But now every familiar thing inside and around it had been altered by what had happened there. A yard path was no longer simply where boots had crossed frozen ground. A doorway was no longer just an entrance worn smooth by routine. A room was no longer a room in which children had played, eaten, or been hushed to sleep. Once blood enters a domestic space, The ordinary objects within it begin to feel accusatory. A chair seems to remember. A wall seems to hold sound. A porch step appears to mark the boundary between the life that was and the life that ended. The discovery of the Lawson murders forced neighbors, relatives, and local authorities to walk into just such a transformation. What they encountered was not merely a collection of dead bodies. It was the collapse of an entire domestic world into evidence. The first clues in such a case are rarely neat. They do not present themselves like sentences already arranged for reading. They emerge through shock, through movement, through people trying to make sense of what the eye resists. Someone comes to the property. Someone notices stillness where there should be activity. On Christmas Day, even in a rural farming community, a household with children should have shown signs of life. Smoke, motion, voices, the ordinary disturbance of family presence. Instead, there was something wrong in the air. And when the wrongness revealed itself, it did so in layers. The outside victims likely formed the first rupture in understanding. The bodies of the two girls, found in the winter yard or near the path, would have struck the discoverer with immediate horror. Not only because they were dead, but because of where they lay. Violence in the open carries a different shock than violence hidden indoors. It meets the eye against the plain truth of the daylight. Frost, hard earth, bare trees, and among them, the unmistakable shape of a body where no body should be. Rural communities are accustomed to death in a practical sense. They know livestock lost, relatives laid out in parlors, the sight of illness, age, and accidents. But murder has its own visual language. It is the wrongness of position, the damage to the body, the abruptness of stillness where movement should be. Whoever first recognized that the girls were not merely injured, but dead, would have felt the mind recoil before the body move. Then comes the second wave of dread. If they are here, what has happened inside? Entering a house after suspected violence is unlike entering any other structure. The threshold becomes psychological before it is physical. Every step carries fear of what will be seen next. In the Lawson home, that next sight was almost certainly devastating beyond what the first discovery had already suggested. Inside or near the porch area lay Fanny Lawson, the mother whose presence should have been the organizing warmth of the household that day. Nearby or within the house were the younger children, their bodies arranged not by sleep or accident, but by murder. Some reports over the years have noted that the victims were found with a kind of care in how they had been positioned, as though after killing them, Charlie Lawson had covered or laid them out. Whether every such detail survived accurately through retelling is less important than what the idea itself tells us about the crime scene's emotional impact. This was not a house in the grip of random chaos. It was a house in which death had been inflicted deliberately, and in its aftermath, the killer had remained long enough to shape the final appearance of the dead. That gives the crime scene an even colder quality. It suggests not only slaughter, but presence after slaughter. Time enough to look, time enough to touch. Time enough to decide how the dead would lie when others found them. A family home turned into a chamber of arranged silence is one of the most haunting forms a crime scene can take. The initial clues, then, were overwhelming in scale even before anyone began to reason through them. Multiple victims, a mother and children, bodies inside and outside the house. No sign of an external intruder in the ordinary sense. No evidence of a burglary gone wrong. No crowd of attackers. The very composition of the scene would have begun directing suspicion inward almost immediately. When a family is found dead within its own domestic space and the father is absent, the absence itself becomes a clue. In some cases, it suggests he fled. In others, that he too lies nearby. In Lawson's case, Both possibilities hung in the air until Charlie's own body was found in the woods. But even before he was located, the shape of the crime pointed toward him with dreadful clarity. There is a particular horror in a scene where the first and strongest clue is relational rather than forensic. The wrong person is missing. In modern crime investigation, people often imagine clues in the language of fingerprints, fibers, ballistics, blood spatter, and neatly labeled exhibits. In 1929, rural North Carolina, the process was far more immediate, less technical, and more dependent on what could be seen, recognized, and inferred by those who arrived first. The shotgun itself, or the evidence of shotgun wounds, would have told a large part of the story. The wounds were destructive. Gunfire at close range leaves little ambiguity about homicidal intent. The bludgeoning of the two girls outside added another disturbing note, suggesting either rage, certainty, or both. The physical condition of the bodies would have indicated not one quick struggle, but a sequence of killings carried out with determination. Clothing, blood patterns, body placement, and the distribution of victims between yard and house all helped reconstruct the broad movement of events, even without advanced forensic science. The scene spoke. It said that the killer had moved through the family's environment systematically. It said that the murders had not occurred in a single burst of confined violence, but across connected spaces the victims knew intimately. It said that the family had been overtaken where they stood, not lured to some distant side or attacked by outsiders in the night. The yard and the house together formed the map of a domestic massacre. Then there was Charlie Lawson's body in the woods, another crucial clue, but one that solved only the question of immediate authorship, not the larger mystery. He was found dead from a self-inflicted shotgun wound, ending the possibility of confession, interrogation, or public accounting. His death closed the circle of who had done it, while opening the deeper void of why. Yet, even as evidence, his body mattered. Its location suggested the final stage of the crime's geography. He had not died among the family inside the house. He had stepped away from them into the winter woods, as if separating himself physically from the scene he had created, while remaining enclosed within it psychologically. That distance was small in practical terms, but symbolically, it mattered. He left the house of the dead behind him only far enough to kill himself alone. It was not escape. It was withdrawal into the last available pocket of privacy. Investigators and neighbors would have read this in the old-fashioned way people often read violent death, before the language of modern profiling existed, as evidence of a man who had made a final decision and carried it through to the bitter end. Still, his body offered no note, no authoritative explanation, no single clue that could anchor motive. The house remained full of bodies and questions. One of the most unsettling aspects of the Lawson crime scene lies in how domestic it remained even after violence, unlike a battlefield or roadside attack. A family home still contains its previous life when it becomes a murder scene. Dishes may remain. Bedding may still be warm or recently used. Clothing hangs where it was placed. Food preparation may have begun. Children's belongings lie where they were left. These things do not disappear when murder occurs. They remain. And by remaining, they intensify the horror. In the Lawson house, every trace of family life would have sharpened the contrast. Here was a home that had expected to continue its Christmas day. Here were signs of routine interrupted, a mother's labor cut off midstream, children's expectations broken before they had time to become memories. The initial witnesses would not have needed formal training to feel the violence of that interruption. They could read it in the setting itself. This was not just death. It was domestic life arrested in place. The psychological impact of discovering murdered children inside a home is difficult to overstate. Adults encountering such a scene are forced into a collision between instinct and evidence. Instinct says protect, cover, lift. Deny. Evidence says look, identify, understand. In rural communities, where relationships are often closer and generations overlap visibly, that emotional conflict can be even stronger. The Lawson family was not anonymous. These were known people. Neighbors had likely seen the children alive recently. Perhaps dressed up for the photograph, perhaps moving around town. Perhaps simply as part of the community's familiar human pattern. To find them now reduced to stillness on Christmas Day would have produced not only grief, but a kind of moral disorientation. Murder always wounds the dead first, but it also wounds the witnesses by forcing them to carry images the mind did not consent to receive. The first men and women who stepped into the Lawson aftermath became, unwillingly, custodians of those images from the crime scene itself. Several immediate conclusions likely emerged. The killer was almost certainly Charlie Lawson. The family had been killed in a sequence rather than all at once. Some were taken outside, others inside. The absent son Arthur had survived only because he was not present. And that fact would soon become another clue of its own in family annihilation cases. The survivors are sometimes targeted and sometimes left by design. Here, Arthur's survival appeared accidental, which suggested that Charlie had intended total destruction but failed to complete it. Later accounts that Charlie waited for Arthur before killing himself reinforced this impression, transforming Arthur's absence into one of the most chilling negative clues in the case. The victim who was supposed to be there and was not. In many investigations, clues come from what is present. In this case, one of the most powerful clues came from what had failed to happen. The condition of the victims also shaped the initial interpretation. The use of a shotgun indicates practical access, familiarity, and overwhelming force. On a farm, a shotgun was not an exotic weapon. It was part of ordinary life, associated with hunting, protection, utility. That familiarity made its use here even more intimate. Charlie had not needed to acquire some outside instrument of crime. He used what already existed within the household world. The bludgeoning of the girls after shooting them suggested either an effort to make absolutely certain they were dead, or an overflow of violence beyond the trigger pull itself. That added severity would have stayed with investigators because it implied not mere efficiency, but intensity, even if the broader motive remained hidden. The method showed commitment to the act. No one could look at those bodies and mistake the crime for hesitation. Another early clue lay in the very absence of struggle on a larger scale. There was no sign of a siege. No evidence of multiple armed intruders tearing through the property. No widespread wreckage implying a long fight. This does not mean there was no panic. There certainly was. But panic inside a family massacre does not always leave the same external signs as a defensive conflict with strangers. The killer begins with authority and proximity. Victims are caught in disbelief as much as fear. Children cannot organize resistance. A mother cannot save everyone at once. The scene may therefore look, after the fact, eerily controlled compared with the emotional chaos it contained in the moment. That eerie control becomes a clue to relationship. It tells investigators that the killer moved through the household with devastating advantage. An advantage granted not by superior numbers, but by the trust built into family life as the news spread. The crime scene stopped being private and entered the wider social world, but its first power remained local. Physical, immediate. People would have spoken of what they saw in hushed, disbelieving fragments. The girls outside, Fanny near the porch. the children in the house, Charlie in the woods. Each detail became part of a spoken map passed from one person to another, in older cases especially. The first clues do not live only in official records. They live in memory, rumor, retelling, and the emotional emphasis that witnesses place on one image over another. A lawman may note the facts. A neighbor may remember the shoes on a child, the angle of a body, the terrible quiet. Both become part of the case's afterlife. This helps explain why the Lawson murders grew into folklore so quickly. The scene itself was unforgettable. It was the kind of tableau that people could not see and then return to ordinary speech unchanged. There was also a darker clue embedded in the family photograph taken shortly before the murders.